In the annals of history, a name stands out as one of the famed embodiments of the Viking spirit and ambition. Harald Sigurdsson, or popularly Harald Hardrada. His title, Hardrada, being an epithet likely later given by Harald's opponents that roughly translates as stern counsel, severe, or hard ruler. Harald likely went by the title Harald Fairhair during his time, referring to his blonde hair. Medieval chronicler Adam of Bremen called him the Thunderbolt of the North. He is regarded by many as the last true Viking, and his death by an arrow to the throat at Stamford Bridge in 1066 heralded the end of the Viking Age, according to most historians. In terms of Harald's height, it's been said that he was tall, but how tall exactly? An exact description is inconclusive, but Harald was likely above 6 feet in height, and his complexion no doubt was battle-hardened from years of warrior experience, having served in the elite Byzantine Varangian Guard for about 15 years, on top of his other experience in battle. So how can we draw conclusions about Harald's height? So Harald was described by the medieval Icelandic historian Snorri Sturluson to have been physically larger than other men and stronger. It's said that he had light hair, a light beard, and a long upper beard, basically a moustache, and that one of his eyebrows was somewhat higher situated than the other. He also reportedly had big hands and feet and could measure 5 ells in height. It's not known whether Snorri's description of Harald's physical appearance actually represents historical fact. An ell was a measurement used up to the 13th century in Iceland, where Snorri hailed from himself, measuring 18 inches per unit. That would in theory make Harald a staggering 7.5 feet tall. But how is this ell, this unit of measurement, actually determined? Well, few Vikings carried around measuring sticks with them on their journeys. Wouldn't be very practical, so the ell was based on the approximate measurement of a man's elbow to the tip of his middle finger. People back then were also a little bit shorter on average, we're talking about 5.5 feet, so their limbs would also be correspondingly shorter too. Nonetheless, if Snorri's claim is true, Harald would have been a giant of a man. But we can make the case that Snorri's accounts were some centuries after the events they described. Harald's tall stature is also supported by a story that says that before the Battle of Stamford Bridge, the Saxon Harold Godwinson offered his brother, the defector Tostig, back the earldom of Northumbria, and Harald himself 6 feet of the ground of England, or perhaps more, seeing that he is taller than most men. That's according to Henry of Huntington. A second account from Snorri Sturluson states 6 feet of English ground, or 7 feet, as he was taller than other men. Edward I, known by many names including Edward Longshanks, Hammer of the Scots and English Justinian, reigned as King of England from 1272 until 1307. He's regarded as one of the greatest Plantagenet kings. His byname, Longshanks, is of particular interest when considering his height. The name means long legs, so it's no surprise that Edward stood at an imposing 6 feet 2 inches, which was extremely rare for the time. Handsome, tall, powerful and tough, he had the qualities that men admired. The historian Michael Prestwich states that his long arms gave him an advantage as a swordsman, long thighs one as a horseman. In youth, his curly hair was blonde, in maturity it darkened, and in old age it turned white. The regularity of features was marred by a drooping left eyelid. His speech, despite a lisp, was said to be persuasive. Edward's temperamental nature and height made him an intimidating figure, and he often instilled fear and dread in his contemporaries. Although he held the respect of his subjects for the way he embodied the medieval ideal of kingship as a soldier, an administrator, and a man of faith. In 1774, the Society of Antiquaries in London opened Edward's tomb at Westminster Abbey, finding that the body had been well preserved over the preceding 467 years, and they took the opportunity to determine the king's original height. The body was almost perfectly preserved, with the dried skin still very visible and the body measuring a 6 foot 2 inches tall. The nickname Longshanks is therefore based on truth. The degree of preservation was possible due to the consistently low humidity and coolness of air at the abbey. Many of the other bodies interred there are no doubt in the same condition if they have not been disturbed. Edward IV was King of England from 1461 to 1470, then again from 1471 until his death in 1483. He was a central figure in the Wars of the Roses, a series of civil wars in England fought between the Yorkist and Lancastrian factions between 1455 and 1487. Edward's contemporaries, such as Philippe de Comines, described him as handsome, affable and energetic. Unusually tall for the period at 6 feet 4 inches, that's 193 centimetres, he was an impressive sight in armour and took care to wear splendid clothes. This was done deliberately to contrast him with King Henry VI, whose physical and mental frailties undermined his position. Good looks and with a genial personality, he was popular and generally well regarded by the people. His taste for the finer things was so much so that his chambers in the Tower of London were so sumptuously decorated they became known as the House of Magnificence. Edward's height as a monarch was only surpassed by Peter I of Russia, who was 6 feet 8 inches, that's 203 centimetres tall, although Peter hasn't made this video's list as his reign took place outside of the medieval period. In his time, it was noted that Edward IV resembled his father little, especially in terms of his then exceptional height when compared to the other members of the House of York, who were not well known for their height. Therefore, he was a bit of an anomaly. Questions about his paternity were raised during Edward's own reign, for example by Richard Neville, 16th Earl of Warwick in 1469, and repeated by Edward's brother George, shortly before his execution in 1478, but with no evidence. It must be noted that in propaganda wars such as these, many statements were used that perhaps had no basis in truth. In the end, Edward IV was rather too fond of his favourite foods and wines as he reached middle age, and he became seriously overweight. The king died, perhaps of a stroke, at Westminster on the 9th of April 1483, aged just 40 years old. Sir John Cheyne, Baron Cheyne, born circa 1442 and died in 1499. Cheyne was appointed Master of the Horse to King Edward IV of England in 1460, and he established himself under the reign of the Yorkist branch, but later supported Henry VII as his personal bodyguard. Nicknamed the Vigorous Knight by his contemporaries, Sir John Cheyne was a massive man of redoubtable strength. A 21-inch thigh bone found in his tomb at Salisbury Cathedral in the 18th century puts his estimated height at 6 feet 8 inches tall. It was following the death of Edward IV in 1483, and with the seizure of the crown by Richard III, that Cheyne switched sides to support the Lancastrian Henry Tudor's claim to the throne, joining him in exile in Brittany. Henry knighted him in 1483 after their return to England. Cheyne's most famous moment was this. At the Battle of Bosworth Field in 1485, Richard III led an audacious mounted cavalry charge deep into the Lancastrian ranks against Henry Tudor in an attempt to kill him and end the conflict. Cheyne himself was part of Henry's personal bodyguard at this critical time. After Richard killed Henry Tudor's standard-bearer, Sir William Brandon, it is said that Sir Cheyne rode forward as if to seize the dropped standard. Richard managed to unhorse Cheyne by whacking him around the head with a broken lance. This struck the crest from his helm, and, when he fell unconscious to the ground, his head was laid completely bare. Stunned for a time, he recovered to find Henry Tudor safe, but his own protection lacking a helmet. Richard ultimately came within a sword's length of Henry, but was quickly surrounded and cut down in the ensuing melee. Evidence from the study of Richard's skeletal remains suggests that this killing blow may have been a cut from a halberd on the rear of his skull, or perhaps a sword thrust had penetrated all the way through the brain. So, it is said, a helmetless Cheyne took his sword and cut the skull and horns from a bull's carcass, which happened to be lying nearby, and placed them on his head instead. He was later granted the bull's scalp as his family crest. It is perhaps worth noting that Richard III was about 5 feet 8 inches in height, but due to his scoliosis, a deformed spine, he appeared much shorter than this. So next to John Cheyne, Richard would look quite different indeed. Henry VII and John Cheyne both survived the Battle of Bosworth, But King Richard III was not so lucky, and the Earl of Richmond was crowned King Henry VII there on the battlefield. Cheyne fought once again at the Battle of Stoke in 1487. In 1486 he was made a Knight of the Garter and was called to Parliament as Baron Cheyne. Lastly on our list we have the giant John Middleton, who lived during the late 16th and early 17th centuries. A quick disclaimer though, as this was supposed to be a list of the tallest of the Middle Ages. Middleton was born about 100 years outside of when most historians agree the Middle Ages ended, but nonetheless, he's too legendary to keep off this list. Middleton was born in the village of Hale, near Liverpool, and according to contemporary accounts in his epitaph, he grew to the incredible height of 9 feet 3 inches tall, and slept with his feet hanging out of the window of his house. Because of his size, the landlord and sheriff of Lancashire, Gilbert Ireland, hired him as a bodyguard. When King James I stopped by in 1617 to knight Ireland, he heard about Middleton and invited both of them to his court, which they accepted in 1620. Middleton beat the king's champion in wrestling and in doing so broke the man's thumb. He received £20, a large amount of money in those times. Jealous of his wealth, Middleton's companions mugged him or swindled him out of his money while he was returning to Hale. Middleton died impoverished in 1623. He was buried in the cemetery of St Mary's Church in Hale. The epitaph reads, "Here lieth the body of John Middleton, the child of Hale, 9 feet 3, born 1578, died 1623. Middleton is likely one of the tallest people in history. If these height markings are accurate, he would surpass Robert Wadlow's stature of 8 foot 11 inches. Although he was said to be 9 foot 3 inches, some experts suggested that he was merely 7 foot 9 inches, believing his hands were not measured accurately, according to records. However, his remains had supposedly been exhumed during the Victorian era and were worked out to be about 9 foot 3 inches.